My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hi, I'm Ebony Belhumeur, and today's leadership quote comes from an unknown source. If you're not lighting any candles, don't complain about being in the dark.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
You're listening to episode 58. Thank you for listening to the Leader Assistant podcast. Here's your host, my dad.
Hey friends, welcome to episode 58. I'm excited to be speaking with Ebony Belhumeur today about remote work, managing an inbox, and a few other awesome topics. First, I wanted to share that we have a few new online courses at assistanceguide.com. We're actually launching one with Ebony as well on remote work, but we have one on crafting the perfect resume, managing conflict, travel management. We have one on LinkedIn mastery from my good friend Maggie Jacobs. And then we have one on managing constant interruptions, as well as another video course to go along with my book called The Leader Assistant. So check it out at assistanceguide.com and be sure to check out all the different topics and courses and sign up for some professional development. And don't forget to have your employer pay for your professional development. If you have any questions about any of the courses, feel free to email me at hello@leaderassistant.com. I'd be happy to help. But again, assistanceguide.com for some awesome courses for assistants from some amazing instructors. All right, today's episode show notes can be found at leaderassistant.com/58. And I hope everyone is staying safe and well and enjoys the show. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the Leader Assistant podcast. It's your host, Jeremy, and today I'm speaking with Ebony Belhumeur. Ebony is the executive assistant to the founder and CEO of Protocol Labs. Ebony, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Jeremy? It's so nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. And what part of the world are you in?
So I actually live in a small town just outside of Paris called Tours, France. And I work between here where I live and Palo Alto where my CEO lives. So I travel about once a month. Sans coronavirus, I'm not traveling as much now.
Awesome. So that's a pretty long commute, right?
Yeah, but I mean, normally I'm just commuting between my bed and my office, which is pretty nice.
Awesome. That's awesome. How did you end up with that gig?
So after my husband and I left San Francisco, we both really were committed to working remotely and decided that we were only going to pursue organizations and companies that had remote positions. My husband being a software engineer, that was pretty easy for him, but a little bit more challenging for me being an executive assistant. So I really looked into organizations that I thought had were really mission driven and progressive in the way they thought about how work could be done and what the future of work looked like. And there were a couple of companies that I zoned in on, and Protocol Labs was one of them. I was really passionate about our mission to improve not only the long-term integrity of the internet, but the equitability of it as well. And I was also really interested in working kind of at the vanguard of blockchain and crypto technology. So it checked a lot of boxes. So randomly, they had an opening for a position for an executive assistant for their CEO, Juan. And I applied. They said no. And I responded saying, I think you should really look at me again. I would really love the opportunity to connect and just tell you a little bit more about what I think I can bring to the organization. And they said, okay, we'll talk to you. And a couple months later, they offered me the role, and I've been there ever since.
Awesome. So was it listed as a remote gig, or did you kind of convince them?
No, it was listed as a remote opportunity because the entire organization is actually remote. So we have people in Australia, New Zealand, Krakow, Lisbon, myself in France and a couple others, New York, Texas, and quite a few people in Silicon Valley.
That's great. So what is the kind of number one tip you have for people who are working remote or aspire to work remote someday?
Yeah. So the catch-22 with working remote is kind of like the chicken and the egg, sort of like if you want to get a remote job, they want to see that you've had remote experience. Just like getting your first job. It's like, hey, we want to see you've had experience. And you're like, I'm trying to get my first job. So what I would do if you were interested in working remotely is to look at companies who are remote first organizations rather than like a couple people work. They allow a couple senior people to work remotely. Looking into those organizations, hone in on a couple that like you feel are really aligned with your mission and things that you would be passionate about doing, and connect with those people in that organization before you ever think about applying for that position. So find them on LinkedIn and Twitter or on GitHub. Find out, the kind of work they're doing. Get in their comment section so they have some visibility into who you are and what you do. And in your current role, find out if there are any opportunities for you to work remotely. I guess fortuitously, we're in a really great, a bad place, but good place now for people who want to gain experience working remotely and understand like sort of what does it mean to prioritize your own workload and connect with people that you work with effectively when you never or rarely interact in person. And this is actually a really good opportunity to kind of explore those things and figure out like, hey, does this work for me? Or am I really uncomfortable and I'm a people person who needs to be around other people and get that in-person immediate feedback? Or, hey, I'm really thriving here. I feel like my productivity is up because I'm not being interrupted constantly with people wanting to share information or talk. So I think that's a really good place to start.
That's great. Yeah, I love working from home. I'm more of an introvert, love kind of getting my stuff done without anybody bugging me. So I get a little bit of flexibility in that. I get to work from home occasionally in my current role, but
that's awesome.
Long
That's
term,
how I
think
started.
I'm definitely leaning more towards remote.
Yes, absolutely. Like we have 3 kids. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And the commute was not sustainable for my husband or myself in the way that we want to prioritize our family time and the time that we spend engaging in work. So we definitely knew like commuting was over for us. Like we were completely done with that. And going forward, we would only be interested in working with organizations that were remote. It's super hard, to like be frustrated on the way to work and then come home and like have to spend time with your kids. It's really nice when you have that flexibility. Plus we love to travel. Hence we moved outside of Paris so we can, on the weekends we go to Chateau, we go on long weekends, we go to Switzerland or, Portugal or Spain, which is great too. So
nice. So how do you balance having young kids in the house and working from home?
So I have an awesome partner. I have a great nanny, and our 2 older kids are in a local private school here. So it works out really, really well because I work for 45 minutes and then I go upstairs to spend 15 minutes with my youngest daughter, which was really great when I was breastfeeding because with my oldest 2, I was going into the office and I had to pump, and it was super stressful for all you working moms out there who know what that's like. And, with my youngest daughter, because I was working from home, it's great. It's like I just go upstairs, I can nurse her, come back down and get some work done. So it's really been all about balance, but really great.
That's great. So let's rewind a little bit and tell us about your very first job, and then kind of what you learned in that role that you still use today.
Sure. Yeah. So my first role was as a waitress. I was illegally working under the table when I was 13 because I grew up incredibly poor in Los Angeles and my parents needed us to get jobs. So it was a really hard job, but I was really inspired by all of the tips that I got. That was one of my favorite parts about working. I think the thing that I always took away from being a waitress is that everyone is the hero of their own story. So when you're a waitress, you realize how each and every table thinks that like they're your only table. Like they have absolutely no conception that like you're juggling 8 or 9 different tables with, 15 to 20 different customers across those tables, all with their own set of unique demands and requests. And each table thinks that like, they're the table that needs to be focused on. And that's really helped me sort of understand how to develop stronger interpersonal communication skills that reflect the kind of empathy and compassion you need in order to be effectively collaborative with people. When you understand that, when you start thinking about how the other person is approaching this as sort of the hero of their own autobiography, it gives you a really good picture into how and why they're making decisions.
So you're saying that you're working with multiple executives right now is like working with multiple tables at a restaurant.
Yes, exactly. Working with multiple customers who all like are pretty sure that like this is the most important thing you should be doing is getting their salt or extra mayo.
Definitely teaches you how to prioritize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So when and why did you become an assistant?
I fell into this role, I think like a lot of people. I started working with a young entrepreneur who was interested in building a nonprofit that focused on helping at-risk youth by collaborating with professional athletes to host like camps, clinics, and tournaments. And he was really looking for somebody who had a ton of can-do attitude and was clever. I was working at Pepperdine at the time, and he was a graduate student. So he really liked the way I worked as, an administrative assistant there, and asked if I would, help him start and run this organization, which I thought was super interesting. So I was like, yes. And I just fell in love with the role and stayed.
Awesome. So what do you love what's like the biggest thing you love about it?
Well, I really love the opportunity for constant growth. I really enjoy problem solving and project management. And I think if you approach your work from a growth orientation, then this role provides endless opportunities to learn and develop. I do a wide breadth of work in any given month or quarter, and it's incredibly rewarding to look back and see where I've been able to grow and how much I've been able to get done and stretch myself every year. It's just been really amazing.
Awesome. What about your number one struggle as an assistant?
I would say that my number one struggle as an assistant has been, I think, imparting the importance and impact of this role on executives. I think executives are apprehensive at first to let anyone in as a partner, especially someone with the title of assistant. And it does take quite a bit longer, I think, to build trust and help them understand and see the impact of your work. So I think that's probably been my biggest struggle for sure.
Yeah, definitely common to a lot of assistants.
Yeah.
So what would you tell someone who is kind of not respected and, maybe an assistant calls you tomorrow and says, "Hey, I'm not respected in my role. Can you help me?" What would you say?
Yeah, I always think there are really two scenarios that happen around that kind of sentiment. So the first is where there's like an ideological bend or disposition from a company or an executive where assistants are not respected. So they are the kind of people who make holistic judgments based on sort of one aspect or title in your life. And I don't know that you can change those minds. And even if you could, I don't know that the emotional cost that you would have to pay in order to change those minds would be worth it. And it can be difficult to tell, but I think that those people are typically more rigid when you confront them about, having more work added to your plate and how you could, contribute more and have more of an impact in their assessment that like, no, you're really boxed in and you are going to be defined by this role. The second scenario is when you have people who they're not really showing you respect because you haven't yet earned their respect. So maybe you're performing at expectation of a stereotypical assistant, right? So you grab coffee, it's always there on time, you order snacks, you arrange their calendar, and it looks great. But it's really difficult for those people in your org or your leader to point to places where you're explicitly adding value and making impact. And those people are convincible and can, learn to respect and understand your role in a much deeper and more nuanced way. And I would encourage those people in the second scenario to work on earning respect, right? So that means taking on projects and volunteering for projects that like most other people don't want to do, documenting your learnings, and then being able to point back to where you've added value and impact, sitting in meetings, going above and beyond and saying, hey, I would love to, sit in on this meeting, in a note-taking capacity. And if you don't need me in a note-taking capacity, then simply as an observer to sort of help understand where your priorities lay, where crossover work is happening, and know, the values and importance of the stakeholders involved in these different work streams. In the first scenario where it's an ideological bend, I encourage those assistants to continue smiling politely, but to quietly brush up their resumes and reach out to their network and open themselves up for opportunities actively on LinkedIn in a way that obviously respects, your privacy and can be done in a very low profile. But I think it's really important to remove yourselves from those positions. I think study after study shows that people who don't feel psychologically safe for reasons like I'm not being respected in my workplace are going to eventually leave their roles. But more importantly, it's likely that assistants in those companies are also being rotated out like in a revolving door. So proactively finding a new place for yourself where you're respected and getting clear on that in the interview process is probably my best piece of advice.
Love it. So let's talk about one way you can level up, if you will. How can assistants anticipate their executives' needs?
I always give the advice of going on safari. It sounds kind of weird, but what happens, the work that we do is not magic. And as much as I love Black Girl Magic and Black Admin Magic, I generally discourage the narrative that we're magicians or mind readers because the work that we do is incredibly strategic and enormously impactful. And although it's tough to measure, we need to be more intentional about quantifying the impact that we make through things like anticipating our executives' needs. And the advice, as I mentioned, I always give is to go on safari. And what I mean by that is to strategically find relevant stakeholders to reach out to and find information that matters, right? So I always tell people I don't know what my boss does because he tells me what he does. I know because I'm constantly on safari. I'm constantly reaching out in forums and channels on Slack to find out where his priorities lie, what commitments he's made in a recent meeting that maybe I didn't attend. I'm reaching out to event organizers via email and on Twitter to understand what their priorities are for this year, whether or not they would like to engage with my executive on the work that he's doing in these specific channels. And also just constantly staying in touch with our leadership team. So my boss doesn't necessarily have time to constantly be checking in with the leadership team to make sure that, we're on track, they feel positive. So I'm doing that work on my own rather than waiting for my boss to say I spoke with Steve about this last week, but I forgot to tell you and now it's due. So the second he meets with a one-on-one with his executive, right after that's done, I'm in there with that executive meeting and saying, hey, what commitments did we make in this meeting? What priorities came out of this? Is there new alignment? When do we think this is going to impact the timeline that we've set for, other work items. And then when I meet with my executive in our one-on-one, I'm able to bring all of this information that I've gone around the org collecting to him to sort and prioritize and create plan texts around.
That's great. Awesome. It's definitely interesting. So how you mentioned, okay, you maybe go in after the meeting and find out what the action items are. Do you do most of that, I'm assuming, through Slack or through instant message, or do you kind of hop on calls with these executives since you're not there in person most of the time?
Yeah. So I'll do either like hop on a call quickly or follow up on Slack. Either way, depending on what their availability is and what makes sense for me at a time. Usually if I'm, going to pick up my kids, I'm probably going to do it on Slack. And honestly, you can probably just program a little like bot on Slack to, say like pinging you to add your follow-ups here. So what I've created is like a system over the last year that helps people understand that the way to actually get work done super productively isn't to, make a ton of commitments in a meeting, but to have a follow-up with Ebony that details the work that was committed to. So I think of myself, and I talked about this with our other admins in our organizations, is logistical leadership. So we work with strategic leaders. Our executives are the people who set directions. They are the dreamers who can put a vision in front of a team and rally us around a goal that might seem like incredibly far off. And the way that we get to those goals that our leaders are able to set is through people like ourselves who prioritize the really what might seem to be menial and mundane tasks that require us to take the steps every day we need to in order to achieve those goals. And logistical leaders are equally, if not more important as strategic leaders are. And when you take on sort of the mantra of, oh, I'm a logistical leader, that means I do the work that a leader does. I help, cull these action items. I help, I act proactively as a point of accountability in my organization, within my project team or company to ensure that all of the logistics are effectively managed that are going to help us get to where we need to be on the end.
Yeah, I love that. Logistical leadership. That's awesome. You should write a book about it.
I'm writing a book, but yeah,
Nice,
it's not about
nice.
that.
What's the book about?
The book is actually about moving into the age of ubiquitous technology and what it means to be an assistant in this era, where there are things like TaskRabbit and Siri that are really, I think, swallowing a lot of what used to define our core competencies and understanding how do we define new core competencies and how do we build the skills in order to level up in this era.
Awesome. Love it. Do you have an ETA on that book?
Yeah, Q1 of 2021.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Look forward to it.
Awesome.
Okay, so if you could snap your fingers and instantly give all assistants more of something, what would it be?
I would say executive presence. I think that a lot of assistants, especially executive assistants, don't take the executive in their title very seriously. And for me, that means that you are an executive. I'm an executive at assisting people and leaders. So I think, and how I define that is bringing your whole self to work. So that means not bringing very siloed portions of our thinking to work, but really bringing like the entire breadth of our experience to bear on our work. So we have really a really deep well of experiences to choose from in order to help problem solve. I also think it's important to ask valuable questions that deepen our thinking around a problem. And I think executive assistants are really in an excellent position to be able to do that. I'm writing a small talk on effectively managing up that talks about the art of humble inquiry and how you can really use that to make a huge impact in meetings and collaborative environments with other leaders. And then finally, I always say encourage others, because leaders and executives are the people who applaud others for doing great work. And this means, understanding deeply how their work is making an impact. So it implies a level of strategic thinking, right? Because we don't just applaud any and everything. We aren't raising babies here. But when we know how people's work makes a strategic impact on our goals or our OKRs, we're able to applaud them accordingly, which is something that you see really good executives doing very well, understanding that recognition is a renewable resource and leveraging it accordingly.
That's great. I love what you said about executive, kind of putting the executive back in the executive assistant.
Yes, absolutely. We have to do that.
Yeah, love it. So what's one book or resource that you would recommend to assistants?
There are so many, because I always say our minds are like computers. We can only do what we can with the information we have. So whatever we input into ourselves, we're able to kind of make solutions and problem solve around. So I'll give you a couple. The 1 Minute Manager. I absolutely love this book. It is critical, in my opinion, for assistants to read, because I believe that we're people managers for our executives. So we have to learn how to manage. And I think that skill is really underrated for assistants. So please read the 1 Minute Manager. So good they can't ignore you. I think this is a really great book about the importance of leveling up through craftsmanship and finding out how you can add value versus waiting for something you're, super passionate about to come along. And then finally, how to have impossible conversations, because I think the best assistants are the people who are able to diplomatically and tactfully engage with leaders on really tough subjects, like, hey, we keep missing our deadlines. How do we make progress on this? So learning the art of being able to tactfully engage with people who ostensibly have no boss is a really important skill to develop. So that would be the third one, I would say.
Awesome. I have the So Good You Can't Ignore, or They Can't Ignore You book on my list. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay,
but
awesome.
I'm excited.
Yeah, really good.
What's your number one tip for managing an executive's email inbox?
I always say, go to 3 folders. I believe in this so deeply. When I was supporting the CEO of Sephora, it was a little bit gnarly, and I had never worked in a company that large before. All of my previous work had been in companies that were probably 50 employees or less. And then I went to this mammoth of a company that was globally recognized, and I was completely overwhelmed. And I read this article, I want to say it was in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, that was you only need 3 folders. And I've lived by that principle ever since. So the follow-up folder for anything that needs to be followed up with in the next, couple of days or weeks. The today folder, which I love because it's I can check that folder, I can sort quickly and then live in that folder each day. And at the end of the day, I can quickly go in and archive or, place where and it's a new appropriate folder. And then the third one is reference, which is just stuff that somebody linked to a doc that I should probably be able to access. So it's just kind of my library where I can go and type in and search for any email that I need in my reference section. And doing that for my executive has been gold for them as well, because they know that anything in their to-do folder, in their today folder, they need to do today. And that helps them work with the kind of confidence that I think we should be empowering our executives to work with, so they can go quickly into their today folder and know okay, Ebony's got this all organized for me. So anything in here I need to address, and the rest can be, appropriately set aside or ignored until it moves into the today folder.
Love it. Yeah, I think keeping the system, whatever system you use, whether it's a 3-folder system or 4 folders or labeling or whatever, I think as long as it's simple, so that
Yes.
they don't use all that energy trying to decide what to do with each email. That's the key to managing your inbox and also your executive's inbox.
Yeah,
okay.
I totally agree. Simplicity is key.
Yeah. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about the assistance list. So you have a blog, theassistancelist.com. Tell us about why you started it and kind of what your dream and mission is for it.
Yeah, so I swore forever that I was going to start a blog, and like I was a debater in college for a competitive team, and I swore I was going to start a blog, and I had like a small esoteric blog that was like focused on debaters, so like I stopped that, and then I had kids, and I never got around to doing the blog. So after my daughter turned 1 last year, I like committed to myself that I was going to do this and like create a space for all of my ideas that I was like scribbling in journals and, writing in my little journal every week. And I have like piles of these that like weren't going anywhere, and they were just kind of sitting in a closet. And I was like, I have to like put these into the world and like have a place for my creativity to live that other people can access. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this blog. I promised myself. So like over the Christmas break, I just sat down and I started like writing and like creating these ideas around this blog and what it was going to be called. And I started an Instagram page, and it was really exciting and super awesome. So it really is like all of the hard-earned wisdom and thoughts that I've garnered over the last 10 years in my career as an EA, working for a wide variety of companies in tech and corporate retail and nonprofit and crypto, that I hope to share with other assistants to help them, answer a lot of questions that I have gotten over the course of my career. I think kind of like my long-term goal for this is just like a home for my writing, but a place of community for other assistants to come and ask questions and like help each other. There's some really great places that have been emerging that I've seen, like the Leader Assistant podcast is such a great place, which is really wonderful. And I'm excited for assistants who are coming up now because like they have access to so many of these resources, which I think is just really awesome. It's really exciting to see assistants feeling empowered and like wanting to put our voices out there in places of like authority and leadership. So I'm super excited about that. But yeah, that's kind of like the hope for the blog is like, I love blogging. So it's a blog. I mean, it's a place for like really strategic pieces of information to live and sort of like a wisdom repository for other assistants who, have a ton of questions like I did.
That's great. So, what can we do to support you on your blog?
Just, I would say right now, signing up, to my mailing list and, going over, checking out some articles or sharing them on LinkedIn would be great as well. Definitely.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely share the links in the show notes so people can find you and check it out. My kind of final question for the interview is, what makes an assistant a leader?
That's a great question. I always think that like what makes people a leader is their ability to inspire others to action. And when we do that effectively as assistants by like corralling our executives or our teams to act in ways that are both, energy efficient and strategic, that's really what makes us great leaders.
Totally agree. Awesome. Well, Ebony, thank you so much for taking time out of your day all the way from France. Really excited to share our conversation with the world. And just thanks again for doing what you're doing. And I love the remote work situation you have set up and being able to eliminate your commute. I just think that the world is, it's been kind of slow, but I think we're getting more and more traction towards moving that route, at least giving that option to a lot of people. So,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks again to Ebony for a great episode. Check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/58. And don't forget to check out our online courses at assistanceguide.com.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com